Hey everyone, welcome back to our /malicious compliance. In this Reddit story, my arrogant, entitled Karen boss screamed at me in front of the whole office and declared that I was no longer permitted to make any decisions on my own. So when a massive crisis hit, I did precisely what she had commanded, and everything unraveled. Let's get right into it. So, I work in logistics for a manufacturing company. We manage distribution for some fairly major clients, and my role is essentially ensuring that parts arrive at the right place at the right time. I've been doing this for nearly 8 years now, and I'm genuinely skilled at it. I know every driver, every route, every shortcut, and I can redirect shipments practically without thinking. The company had always relied on me to exercise judgment, because in logistics, circumstances shift rapidly, and you simply can't wait around for someone to approve every minor call. Everything was going smoothly until corporate decided we needed a new operations manager. They brought in this woman from outside the organization, someone holding an impressive business degree, but apparently with zero real-world logistics experience. From her very first day, she made it obvious she believed everyone who'd been there longer than her was essentially incompetent, and that only she truly understood how things ought to run. I'll refer to her as the manager, because honestly, that was all she ever wanted to be called. She insisted everyone address her by that title, never by her first name. Red flag number one. But regardless, I've handled worse. During her first week, she sat in our morning briefing where I was walking the team through how I had rerouted 3 trucks the previous day to avoid a major highway closure that would have pushed deliveries back by 6 hours. The clients were satisfied, the drivers were content, and everything had gone perfectly. When I finished, she just stared at me with an expression like I'd personally offended her family. "Who authorized these route changes?" she asked. I blinked. "I did. That's part of my job." "Your job is to follow the schedule," she said. "The schedule exists for a reason." I attempted to clarify that no schedule could anticipate unexpected road closures, but she cut me off and said we'd talk about it later in her office. That conversation was essentially her lecturing me for 20 minutes about protocol and chain of command. She kept insisting I had an attitude problem and clearly didn't respect authority. And yeah, I just sat there absorbing it because I needed the job and figured she'd eventually come to understand how things actually functioned. Spoiler alert, she didn't. Over the following weeks, the manager began rolling out all these new rules. Every decision had to be documented, and every route change required her approval. She produced these enormous printed schedules that took hours to compile and became outdated the moment any variable shifted, which in logistics is essentially nonstop. The other dispatchers and I tried to work within her system, but it was grinding everything to a halt. Deliveries that previously took 2 days were now stretching to 4. Clients were beginning to complain, but the manager had no interest in client grievances. She cared about her system being followed. Whenever someone raised a concern, she'd say the clients simply needed to understand that proper protocol takes time. She actually said that in a meeting once. I watched our sales team's faces go wide. Things really began to escalate between me and the manager a few months in. I had made a call to redirect a driver who'd blown a tire, swapping his delivery with a nearby driver to cover it. It saved us 3 hours and the client received their parts on time. The manager found out and absolutely lost it. She summoned me to her office and ranted about how I had violated protocol and undermined her authority. "I don't care that it worked out," she said. "You don't make those decisions without my approval. You were in a meeting. I pointed out the driver needed an answer right then and there. Then the driver waits on the side of the road for 3 hours until I'm available," she replied. She leaned forward with a cold smile. "Yes, because that's what following the rules means. Something you've apparently never learned." I left that meeting pretty rattled. An older dispatcher who'd been doing this job longer than I'd been alive pulled me aside afterward and told me to keep my head down. The manager was making everyone's life miserable, but corporate adored her because she kept submitting reports about how she was streamlining operations and implementing efficiency protocols. The fact that our actual efficiency was collapsing seemed irrelevant, because her paperwork made it look favorable on paper. Then came the incident that changed everything. It was a Tuesday morning. I was at my desk working through the daily schedule when the manager came storming out of her office, already red-faced, meaning she'd work herself into a state before even stepping out. She made a beeline straight for me while I was mid-conversation with one of our drivers on the phone. I held up a single finger in a one-moment gesture, which was apparently the wrong move because she reached over and hung on my phone. Just press the button and cut off the call. "We need to discuss your attitude problem," she announced loudly. The entire office fell silent. I took a breath. "I'm happy to talk in your office." "No, I think we'll do this right here since you clearly don't care about professional boundaries anyway." And then she just went off on me. In front of the entire dispatch team, the warehouse staff who'd come in for their assignments, and even a couple of truck drivers dropping off paperwork. She ran through a list of everything she thought I'd done wrong. How I was insubordinate, how I thought I was too good to follow basic instructions, how I was constantly undermining her authority. People were staring at their shoes, the ceiling, anywhere except at the two of us. I tried to stay composed. "I understand you're frustrated, but perhaps we should handle this privately." Wrong thing to say. She got even louder. "Don't you tell me what we should do. You are exactly what's wrong with this company. People like you who think that just because they've been here a few years, they know better than management. Well, I have news for you. From this point forward, you don't make a single decision without my explicit written approval. Not one. I don't care if the truck is on fire. I don't care if a driver is having a medical emergency. I don't even care if the client is screaming. You follow the printed schedule, and you get my signature before you deviate for any reason whatsoever. Do you understand?" The office was completely silent. I could feel every pair of eyes on me. And honestly, I'd say those qualify as famous last words. "So, just to be clear," I said slowly, "you want me to obtain your written signature before making any changes to the schedule, regardless of the circumstances?" Did I stutter? "Yes, that's exactly what I want. You follow the paper. That's your job. Follow the paper and get my signature. If you can't handle that, you can find another job." She stormed back to her office and slammed the door. I looked around at my coworkers. A couple of them appeared sympathetic. Most just looked uncomfortable. One of the warehouse guys muttered something about that being messed up as he walked away. As I settled back at my desk, I noticed the security camera mounted in the corner of the dispatch area, the one that records both video and audio for insurance purposes. It had been running the entire time. I sat back down and took a few minutes just to process. My hands were shaking. I'd never been spoken to like that at work, let alone in front of everybody. Part of me wanted to march straight into her office and resign on the spot. But I have a mortgage and bills, and jobs aren't exactly raining from the sky in this economy. So instead, I did precisely what she told me to do. I would follow the paper. The next few days were tense. The manager seemed pleased that she'd put me in my place and largely left me alone. I followed her new protocol to the letter. Every minor decision got documented and placed on her desk for a signature. Driver wants to take an alternate route due to traffic? Sorry, have to wait for the signature. Client calls asking if we can move their delivery up a few hours? Let me check with the manager. She signed off on most things, usually after making me wait long enough to be inconvenient. I could tell she was savoring the power trip. Fine, I could be patient. Then came the Thursday after that, just 9 days after she'd screamed at me in front of everyone. I arrived at my usual time and was going through emails when my phone rang. It was one of our biggest clients, a manufacturing plant that regularly orders specialized parts from us. The kind of client that accounts for roughly 15% of our annual revenue. The kind you simply cannot afford to lose. The plant supervisor was calling in a panic. One of their main production machines had gone down overnight, and they needed a specific part immediately. Like right now, immediately. Without it, their entire production line was halted. Every hour of downtime, he said, was costing them somewhere between $40,000 and $60,000 in lost production. Under normal circumstances, this would have been straightforward. I'd check which drivers were where, find someone near our warehouse who could swing by for the pickup and still cover their other deliveries, and get the part to the plant within an hour or two. I'd done it dozens of times, but I couldn't do that anymore. I had to follow the paper and get the manager's signature. I told the supervisor I'd handle it and get back to him immediately. He asked me to please hurry. Every minute counted. I could hear the urgency in his voice. So I pulled up the current schedule, printed out one of the route change request forms the manager had created, filled in all the details about why we needed to redirect a driver, and walked it over to her office. She wasn't there. Door locked, lights off. I returned to my desk and called her cell phone. Voicemail. I left a message explaining the situation and asking her to call me back immediately so I could get authorization for the emergency delivery. The plant supervisor called back 15 minutes later asking for an update. I explained I was waiting for manager approval per company protocol. There was a long pause. "You're joking," he said. "I wish I were. My hands are tied until I have written authorization. This is going to cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars. Can't you just send the truck? I'm not authorized to make that decision anymore." He said something I won't repeat and then hung up. An hour passed. I tried a manager's phone 3 more times. Nothing. I checked her calendar and saw she'd blocked off client relations lunch, off-site from 11 to 2:30. The plant supervisor called again. His voice had moved past panic into something colder. He told me their losses had now surpassed $200,000 and were still climbing. I said I understood completely and was doing everything within the parameters I'd been given. He said he was going to contact our CEO directly and hung up. I sat at my desk staring at the route change form. The part was sitting in our warehouse. We had a driver who could be there in 90 minutes. All it required was a signature on a piece of paper. But I had been given explicit instructions. Follow the paper, get the signature, no exceptions. Even if the truck is on fire. So I waited. Around 1:30, my desk phone rang. It was someone from our executive office saying a higher-up wanted to speak with me. I'd never actually spoken with him directly before. When he got on the line, he asked me very calmly why a truck carrying a critical part for our biggest client was still sitting in our warehouse. I explained the situation, the new protocol the manager had implemented, my 2+ hours of failed attempts to reach her, and that her instructions had been crystal clear, no deviations from the schedule without her written signature under any circumstances. Then he asked, where is she? According to her calendar, she's at an off-site client relations lunch. A long silence. And a request form? It's on her desk, sir. Along with my notes explaining the urgency and the potential losses. Another pause. Stay at your desk. Don't do anything else. He hung up. About 20 minutes later, the manager came breezing into the office, in a great mood, laughing about something on her phone as she strolled to her office. She didn't even glance in my direction. She'd been in there maybe 5 minutes when the higher-up walked through the door. I'd never seen him in our building before. He went straight to her office and closed the door. Even through the closed door, the yelling was audible. His yelling, specifically. The entire office had gone silent again. But this time, everyone was looking toward the manager's office instead of at me. It lasted maybe 10 minutes. Then the higher-up came out, walked over to my desk, and asked quietly whether I could still get that part delivered today. I said yes. I could have it there in under 2 hours. He told me to make it happen, and then he left. I got on the phone immediately, rerouted the driver, and got the part moving. Then I called the plant supervisor to provide tracking information. He was still furious, but at least the situation was no longer spiraling. The manager didn't emerge from her office for the remainder of the afternoon. The following morning, I arrived to find 2 individuals from corporate security waiting in the parking lot. They walked in alongside me and headed straight to the manager's office. She showed up roughly 50 minutes later, and they met her at the door. I couldn't make out what was said, but she went pale, nodded, and followed them back out to the parking lot. She didn't collect anything from her office, didn't say goodbye to anyone. She just left. The regional operations director, who the manager had reported to, gathered everyone together about an hour later and explained that the manager was no longer with the company, effective immediately, and that he would be overseeing our department directly until a replacement was found. He said the old system was reinstated and that senior dispatchers were once again authorized to exercise judgment as needed. Then he looked directly at me and said he wanted to meet with me in his office after the gathering. I was nervous walking in, but it turned out he simply wanted to express his thanks. He told me the higher-up had already reviewed the security camera footage, including the audio from the dispatch area, capturing the entire scene of the manager screaming at me about following protocol. He said my handling of the situation had been exactly correct. I had followed the instructions as given and documented everything thoroughly. Then he mentioned he was submitting paperwork for a raise, both as an acknowledgement of what I'd been put through and as recognition of the professionalism I'd maintained under genuinely difficult circumstances. He said it would appear in my next paycheck. The best part came a few days later through the office grapevine. Apparently, when the higher-up confronted the manager about the situation, she had doubled down. She insisted her strict protocols had been entirely justified and that I was the problem for not being flexible enough to manage things on my own. She actually argued that I should have known to disregard her instructions during an emergency. The higher-up apparently asked whether she was aware that the dispatch area had security cameras with audio recording capability. She confirmed she was. He then asked whether she'd like to revise her account of what instructions she had actually given me. She held her ground, claiming I had either misunderstood her or was exaggerating. So he pulled up the footage on his phone, right there in her office. The whole thing, her screaming at me in front of everyone, telling me she didn't care if the truck was on fire. I had to follow the paper and get her signature, no exceptions. From what I heard, she then tried to argue that she obviously hadn't meant it quite that literally and that I should have applied common sense. The higher-up reportedly asked how he was supposed to trust her judgment going forward if she issued instructions she didn't actually mean and expected employees to intuit when to disregard direct orders. She didn't have a satisfying response to that one. They escorted her out that same day. Her credentials were revoked before she even left the building. Her remote access to the company network was disabled, and all her active projects were reassigned. It was the swiftest termination I had ever witnessed. The story rippled through the entire company within days. Other departments began sharing their own experiences with the manager. The plant supervisor called me personally the following week to express his thanks and mentioned he'd told our sales team to make sure I receive credit for salvaging the relationship. Apparently, despite the financial losses caused by the delay, he respected that I had done everything within my power given the absurd constraints I'd been placed under, and that I had kept him informed throughout. That genuinely meant a lot to me, because I felt terrible about the whole situation even though none of it had been my fault. In the end, the manager position was never filled. The regional operations director absorbed those responsibilities directly, and the company discovered it actually ran more efficiently without that extra layer of management. Funny how that works. The rigid protocols were scrapped entirely, and we returned to the system that had been functioning perfectly well for years. I'm still at the same job, still making judgment calls, still getting parts where they need to go. But now, when I reroute a truck or adjust a schedule, nobody questions it. And whenever a new policy gets proposed that might slow things down unnecessarily, someone always brings up the manager and her absurd rules. And we all remember what happens when you prioritize paperwork over actually getting the job done. And don't close the video just yet. The next one is a fantastic malicious compliance story titled, "Order Me to Buy Your Kids Expensive Gifts for Christmas." Okay, so my brothers and sisters essentially demanded that my wife and I purchase expensive Christmas gifts for their children, our nieces and nephews, because according to them, we were well off. We're not, really. We're just financially responsible. But since they asked for it, and we'd already set aside a budget, we decided to be a little vindictive this year. So for the most spectacular Christmas possible, each of our nieces and nephews will be receiving 5 tubs of Play-Doh, which sticks to absolutely everything, 5 kilograms of multicolored kinetic sand, which gets into everything, 5 tubs of gooey slime, see above, 5 packs of easy-fill water balloons, an age-appropriate Nerf gun, and safety glasses. This is going to be a very memorable Christmas. Update number 1. Well, this blew up. I probably should have consulted you all before placing the order. You people have truly diabolical imaginations. I think this could become a whole new Christmas tradition, depending on whether my siblings behave themselves going forward. For those suggesting Legos, we already gave small boxes as party favors at our son's birthday a few months ago, so these should pair nicely. For those recommending drum sets or noisemakers, I deliberately left those out. My sisters work night shifts at the hospital, and I have no interest in disrupting their daytime sleep and affecting their performance when lives are on the line. Sleep is sacred. You don't mess with it. For those pointing out that none of this is actually expensive. Exactly. You demand expensive gifts, you get cheap and obnoxious ones instead. And will the children mind? Absolutely not. They will think it's the greatest Christmas of their lives. My wife suggested I use the money we saved on the gifts to pick up a couple of those automatic Nerf guns, for self-defense. Also, no glitter. That's simply a line too far. And the next one is another malicious compliance story titled, "Is this the hottest wing you have?" I feel like we may have covered something similar recently, but this one was still marked as unread. So I believe it's a new submission. So, I used to own a wing restaurant. Nothing extravagant, but a solid selection of flavors and a good beer list. Inevitably, customers would come in and order the suicide wings. I'm a fan of seriously spicy food myself, so I can tell you, these were genuinely hot. But of that group, roughly 5 to 10% would always kick off the same tired bit. These aren't that hot. Can't you do better? Ah. One of my best regulars, a dentist who fancied himself an amateur gardener, decided to help us out by planting a ghost pepper bush. At the time, the ghost pepper was the hottest pepper in the world. He would deliberately underwater the plant, so the peppers would develop as much heat as possible. When he brought them in, I would grind them, seeds and all, into a fine paste, which I'd combine with our suicide sauce and keep off to the side for whenever our self-proclaimed spice connoisseurs showed up to complain. I'd serve them exactly one of what I called the death wing. Seemed like the appropriate name. I required them to wear gloves while eating it to prevent capsaicin burns on their skin. I'd give them a detailed warning about the level of heat they were about to experience, genuinely trying to talk them out of it. By the time we'd gone through all of that, every single person had invariably convinced themselves that backing down would be an affront to their manhood. Interestingly, I never had a woman complain about the wings being too mild, though some would occasionally ask whether there was a hotter option and couldn't be talked out of trying it. So they did. The amusing thing about capsaicin oil is that it often takes a few seconds to fully register. Usually just long enough for the person to finish the wing and begin smugly informing us that it wasn't really that hot. And then the heat would arrive. And once it arrived, it was absolutely relentless. The wing itself was complimentary, but the cup of milk afterward cost $20. Not once did anyone ask for a second one. And the final one is a wonderfully petty revenge story titled, "Closed a popular pizza place for 2 days." When I was 15, I worked at a very popular pizza place in Canada that rhymes with nut. If you can figure out which chain that is, drop in the comments. The place was run and managed by a couple of college students who seemed to think operating a pizza joint made them major players. Congratulations, I suppose. I was between jobs and reluctant to take fast food work, but my first choice, a position at the local arena, hadn't come through because I needed to be 16 to handle certain chemicals they used around the pool. Still months away, so that was a no. I bit the bullet and applied to the pizza place. Got the job and was assigned to the kitchen. Within a month, they wanted me to learn how to make dough. I wasn't keen on it because that meant coming in every weekend at 6 a.m. to have dough ready for the noon opening. I agreed to learn on one condition. I didn't want to do it every single weekend. I was a teenager. I valued my weekend mornings and much preferred working weeknights. They assured me I'd only be scheduled for one weekend morning shift per month. I said fine. They brought in my partner in crime, who I'll call Scott, and got him to agree to the same arrangement. We both learned it and had it down perfectly. Within 2 weeks of learning, we were on back-to-back weekend shifts. Me every Saturday, Scott every Sunday, indefinitely. I went to my manager, raised the issue, and she laughed. "Too bad," she said. The whole crew, servers all in their 20s, thought it was hilarious. They knew we needed the money and figured we wouldn't quit. Then, one Saturday, I got home and my parents told me the arena had called and wanted me to come in for another interview. I went in and was told I'd be offered the position in 2 weeks, the day after my birthday. I asked whether they had any additional openings and mentioned Scott. They said to have him submit his resume and they'd make it work. Time for the petty revenge. The following Saturday, I showed up to the pizza place, sat down in a booth, ordered a chocolate milk, and did absolutely nothing. I lounged around twirling my thumbs until the managers showed up for opening. I was standing there with my apron and name tag in hand. I quit, I said. My manager laughed. Whatever. We were going to let you go anyway. Then she added that if it were her, she wouldn't have bothered showing up at all and would have just left them without anyone to make dough that morning. I laughed and said, "Oh, I know, but I hung around all morning and made zero dough. So you still have to pay me for the shift." The look on her face, priceless. She ended up having to close the store for the entire day because there was no dough ready to work with. And to top it off, Scott repeated the exact same routine the following Sunday. We both ended up at the arena together for the rest of high school and told that story with great fondness for years. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to check out the full playlist on the left, and I'll catch you in the next one.